He began to moan at 4 in the morning before dawn. His voice was hoarse but clear. The servants standing at the door first thought it was a cat that had crept into the chambers. The squeal was so unnatural. But when they heard again, "I see fire," they rushed to call the doctor. Grand Duke Wilhelm von Zernbach was still alive. Although there were no pupils in his eye sockets, he could not hear any sounds, and the skin on his face had begun to peel off. He was alive, fully conscious, and slowly rotting from the inside, with complete memory of his own deeds. By early March, the Duke was no longer able to get out of bed. His bed was changed 3 times a day, but each change resulted in a scandal. The sheets were corroded by a yellow liquid, oozing from his back and groin. The servants who were ordered to remove the fabric refused to touch the linen, even with gloves. Palace orders bound them to their service. But 3 had already been flogged for blasphemous vomiting, as recorded in the valet's report. The Duke himself was still able to raise himself on his elbows and give orders. He was conscious. He understood everything. From the report of the senior physician, submitted secretly to the office of Archbishop Speyer, the Duke is in a state of slow but irreversible decay. Due to internal fever, numerous ulcers have opened up on the inner thighs, in the groin area, and between the shoulder blades. The smell of necrotic pus can be detected through the door. The eyes are covered with white spots resembling scars, and hearing has been completely lost. However, his mind remained clear. He demanded a crown and wine aloud, and talked about new taxes. Increased doses of opium and cauterization with vinegar ointment were prescribed. The result was temporary relief, followed by the resumption of deathly tremors in the limbs. The most frightening thing was not the Duke's physical condition, but his mental state. He continued to rule his lands while on the verge of decay. He signed decrees, from memory by touch, gave orders for arrests, summoned his advisors. His courtiers, pale and silent, entered his chambers with lavender handkerchiefs pressed to their faces. No one spoke aloud about his condition, but everyone already knew the Duke was dying, and death would not be quick. From the report of the Secretary of the Privy Council, in the evening of March 26, he again summoned the junior clerk and dictated changes to his will. He removed the name Ludwig von Hartzmüller and added the name Engelbert. His voice was quiet but confident. His hand was shaking. His fingers were covered in black, and his nails began to fall off. One fell off right while he was signing. The Duke looked at it without surprise and simply said, "Seal it before it's too late." Fear intensified in the castle. The priests who were allowed to see the sick man stood silently at his bedside with icons. One of them, an old monk from the Abbey of St. Agatha, whispered that this happens when there is a great curse, when the body is still alive, but rotting while still alive. The bishop was summoned, but was delayed on the roads by flooding. It was then decided to resort to an ancient rite of purification, incense burning, and the application of a wax sign of vow. A round seal made of church wax was baked onto the Duke's forehead in the hope that this would stop the decay. He did not resist. He laughed. The Duke knew he was dying, but he refused to admit defeat. On the 3rd day of April, he demanded that his battle standard be brought to him, the very one he had carried in his youth during the Rhine campaigns. It was placed on his chest. A faint scent of lavender wafted from the fabric, which had been stored in a chest for decades. For the first time, the room did not stink. He whispered, "I have defeated everyone." Then he began to vomit, black, clotted, stretching to the pillow. Then he lost consciousness. The next morning, he opened his eyes again. His pupils were no longer visible. His eyes were white as glass. He no longer blinked, but he could still hear. That was obvious. When Easter hymns began to sing outside the windows, his body began to convulse. These were not death throes. Later, a monk who saw everything with his own eyes claimed that the Duke was screaming with his soul. On the same day, He ordered that no women be allowed near his bed. When the bishop finally arrived, he heard only one thing from him: "I feel the devil licking my feet." The servants no longer entered without knives. One of the cooks who brought him broth claimed that the Duke's body was moving in his stomach. His stomach was indeed swollen, as if it were boiling from the inside. It was decided to perform an autopsy while he was still alive to release the pus. This was done personally by a physician from Heidelberg, summoned by secret order of the Dowager Duchess. When the wound was pierced, pus burst out under pressure, with a crunch, splashes, and a foul odor. The Duke lost consciousness, but did not die. After the procedure, the Duke's body became limp, like a bag of liquid. He was not lifted again. He lay naked, covered with a light cloth, his mouth open. His eyes did not close. He did not eat or drink, but he continued to live. On the 5th day of April, a man in a hood entered the room, a representative of the Archbishop. The servants left. No one knew what had happened during those 10 minutes, but when the guest left, he said, "Soon there will be silence." At dawn on April 7th, the Duke stirred. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, but showing no signs of consciousness. One of the monks remarked, "He is still with us, but his mind, where is it now?" However, that day brought no relief. It only accelerated the horror. His stomach continued to swell. The medic from Heidelberg, no longer daring to attempt another puncture, ordered that a cloth be soaked in vinegar and applied to the wound. It did not help. Pus oozed out and soaked into the bed. Black beetles began to crawl around the body. No one understood where they had come from within the stone walls. Some whispered that it was a sign. Others claimed that the Duke was already dead, and that something else was living inside his body. Secret services began in the inner chapel. Only monks of the senior order and envoys from Mainz participated in them. The Duchess ordered that all silver vessels, except for the main cup, be given to the church, and that prayers be said for her husband's soul. But she herself did not enter the chambers, not once since the beginning of his illness. From a letter from the junior confessor to the abbot of St. Benedict's monastery, the Duke's body is not responding to incense or rituals. Yesterday, when I sprinkled him with holy water, the skin on his chest swelled and burst. Pus spurted out, and one of the servants was blinded in one eye. We do not speak of this. When he is at rest, there is silence. Even the candles do not crackle. I feel something pulling us into the abyss. Meanwhile, rivalry between the two lines of heirs was growing in the palace. Engelbert von Zernbach, recognized in the last will and testament, arrived in the capital with a detachment of personal guards. Ludwig von Gartzmüller, who had been removed but was supported by half of the Reichstag, locked himself in the lower halls and ordered his men to swear allegiance to him. Soldiers began to gather in the courtyard. The city council demanded that the Duke be declared dead to prevent bloodshed. But no one could say when he would die. He was still breathing. From a palace report passed through a guard to the chancellery. There is unrest inside. The servants are changing every day. Several fled during the night. One threw himself into a well. There is no official confirmation of his death. The Duke is silent, but opens his mouth when he hears footsteps. His face is contorted in a blind grimace. No one knows whether he is alive or dead. The smell is terrible. The nobles whisper about his curse. They say he is rotting away from guilt. On the 3rd day of Easter week, while hymns were still being sung in the city, 2 of the Duke's toes fell off. They were removed from the sheet, wrapped in cloth, and burned in the courtyard. He did not cry out. He did not move, but a tear rolled down his cheek. After that, the monk, who had been silent until then, ordered that all attempts to treat him be stopped. He declared that the Duke's body had become a vessel of wrath, and that further contact could lead to his death. The Duchess agreed. A grill was placed in the chamber. Behind it, a table with oil, bread, and water. No one entered the chamber again. From that moment on, he lay alone, without candles, without prayers, without sound, only his breathing, intermittent and hoarse, and the beating of his heart, which could sometimes be heard throughout the room. Reports stated, "He is dying every minute, but he does not die." From a later medical treatise on decomposition in the living body, written 20 years later, the case of Duke William described above is unique in terms of the duration and depth of decomposition. The body retained cardiac activity despite extensive necrosis of the soft tissues, complete blindness, deafness, and failure of the internal organs. Abdominal distension, discharge of pus, skin detachment, and even the loss of limbs did not stop the brain from functioning. He suffered and was aware of his suffering. This makes his death not medical, but metaphysical. At the end of the second week of April, panic broke out in the castle. Engelbert assembled a detachment ready to take the palace by force. Ludwig threatened to set fire to the lower storerooms if he was not allowed to see the Duke. The city was on the verge of rebellion. The nobles demanded proof of life, and the servants said that at night they heard moans coming from under the ground. One such night, the senior monk, the one who had once sprinkled water on the Duke, entered the chambers. He stood at the head of the bed for a long time, then leaned over and whispered, "If you can hear me, blink." He waited. Not a blink, but a whisper escaped from the Duke's lips, "I am here." The monk left silently. The next morning, he announced, he will not leave until he is taken away. Then it was decided to celebrate Mass for the dead. With the body still alive, the priests hesitated, but the nobles insisted. Everything took place downstairs, in the crypt. A lamp burned over the Duke's body. For the first time in 3 weeks, 3 people entered the chambers: a priest, a doctor, and a notary. They stood at the door. The Duke did not move, but he was still breathing. At exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, when the first hymn sounded in the crypt, the candle in the chambers went out. The flame disappeared on its own. This was the first sign. Then there was silence, complete silence. No breathing, no moans, only open eyes, only an open mouth, only an empty body. But the notary did not confirm death. He said, "This is not the end, this is waiting." On the third day, after the supposed death of the Grand Duke, the body began to make sounds. It happened at dusk. A servant who had placed a bowl of water near the door heard a long, drawn-out wheeze, like a moan from deep underground. The door was not opened. No candles were lit, but reports continued to come in. One of the guards at the bars swore, "He's calling for his mother." Meanwhile, the political struggle escalated into open confrontation. Engelbert occupied the north wing of the palace and demanded that the seals be handed over to him. Ludwig surrounded the chancellery and began to form his own council. Each of them claimed that the Duke was already dead and used a copy of the will as proof. The Archbishop of Speyer didn't arrive. His envoy left but disappeared on the way. The principalities in the east declared independence, taking advantage of the power vacuum. People in the city said, "If the Duke is alive, let him come out." But no one could, or wanted to, go inside. From a secret note by the Chamberlain, passed onto the archives 20 years later. "That night I went in. I couldn't bear it. His eyes were open, but covered with a film. Foam flowed from his mouth like milk. The skin on his chest had peeled away, revealing his ribs. He did not move, but there was a gurgling sound coming from his stomach. I pressed a cloth to his mouth, not because of the smell, but out of fear. He is not dead, but he is not alive either." Toward the middle of April, the body began to change shape. His stomach caved in, his face became emaciated, and the skin on his legs shriveled. As was later written, the Duke shriveled up like a dried plum, but the rot did not disappear. It penetrated the walls. The stone darkened. The fabrics became moldy. The palace became a cursed place. The townspeople avoided it. The servants refused to stand guard. They left water and food at the entrance and left. When two of his courtiers demanded that his chambers be opened and his death officially declared, the Dowager Duchess replied, "As long as he breathes, he is sovereign." Then Engelbert gathered his courtiers and declared himself temporary regent. That same night, Ludwig ordered his guards to break down the gates and storm the palace. 3 squires were killed in the brief skirmish. Blood spilled at the very door to the Duke's bedroom, but no one dared to open it. From the report of the city elder to the Archbishop of Mainz, unrest has broken out in the city, and the common people whisper that the Duke is living without a soul. Priests of the lower orders are demanding an exorcism. Merchants are leaving. Bakeries are closed. The people call the palace the house of the rotting king. If the body is not buried, the plague will begin. On the 3rd day after the storming, at 4:30 in the morning, the bars on the door were broken. 6 men entered, 3 soldiers, 2 doctors, and a notary. The Duke lay as before, his eyes open, his mouth slightly ajar, his body motionless. But now there was a transparent crust on his lips, like dried ice. When one of the doctors touched his hand, the Duke's finger broke off and remained in his palm. The second doctor shook his head. Decomposition is complete. He is dead. This was recorded, signed, and sealed. Only then was his death announced. Only then did they begin to prepare the tomb in the crypt. Only then were the funeral banners raised. But even then, no one said, "He is dead." Everyone said, "Finally, he is gone." The funeral was postponed for 3 days. The embalmers refused to enter. The first 2 died while trying to prepare the body. One suffocated, the other lost consciousness and fell into a fever. On the 3rd day, monks were called from Würzburg. They wrapped the body in thick cloth without opening it and ordered no one to touch it. The coffin was made of old oak and covered with resin. The lid was nailed down with 16 nails. Each nail bore the name of one of the apostles. The face depicted on the lid had no features. The funeral took place behind closed doors. The priests were silent. The people did not cry. The streets were quiet. The Duke disappeared from the world, like a rotting tree disappears into the ground. No ritual, no honors, no hymns. From a later report by the ambassador of Brandenburg, after his burial, everything collapsed. Ludwig was killed on the same day. Engelbert was exiled. The Duchess disappeared. The Archbishop did not arrive. The people began to leave the city. The palace was sealed. The gates were boarded up. An inscription was carved on the door. "He can still hear." No one knows who did it. Thus ended the reign of the great Duke. It was not death that put an end to it, but decay. His body was a warning. His power was a curse. His name was no longer spoken aloud, and his will was burned. Spring in the duchy was cold, and this saved the city from an epidemic. But it did not save it from fear. After the funeral of Duke Wilhelm von Zernbach, the streets were deserted. Merchants began to leave the capital. Inns closed. The ringing of bells fell silent. In the Cathedral of Saints, Peter and William, a requiem mass was read every day, but it grew quieter and quieter, less and less frequent. Rumors spread through the city's alleys that someone was moaning in the western tower at night. Children were silent. Women did not open their windows. Men did not look toward the palace. The coffin with the body was left in the underground crypt, but no one had seen it again. Not even the priests, the last ones to go down there, said that the tar on the lid had swelled up, and there was a smell of meat coming from under the boards. One of them fell into a delirium. Another committed suicide. A letter written by a court physician a year later, addressed to the master of the University of Vienna. None of the fevers known to me, none of the blood diseases, none of the descriptions of the plague can explain what I saw. His skin was rotting on him like a decomposing carcass, but his heart was beating. His speech was coherent. He ruled, punished, and gave orders. His mind remained intact, but his body betrayed him before our eyes. This was not an illness, it was punishment. Political turmoil ensued. After Engelbert's expulsion and Ludwig's death, there was no recognized ruler left in the duchy. A regency council was formed from 3 old dignitaries, but one of them died that same week, and the other 2 left the city, fearing a curse. The Reichstag refused to recognize any appointment until the will was opened, but the will, signed with a finger without a nail, was considered unholy. It was declared invalid. From palace reports, mushrooms began to grow in the inner chambers. The ventilation grills are black with mold. The fabrics are rotting. Even the stone has become damp. We tried to carry out the furniture, but it crumbled at the slightest touch. The library reeks of decay. The ink on the parchments has swollen. No one has lived in the palace for over a month. Even the guards are standing in the street. The church remains silent. The archbishop never arrived. He was replaced by lower-ranking priests who did not dare to enter the chambers. In letters to the Roman bishops, they described an event beyond human understanding. But no response came from Rome. The papal nuncio, who had arrived in the duchy, turned back without dismounting from his horse when he saw the reports. The people took this as a sign. Processions began throughout the district. People fell to their knees before the palace walls, wept, and beat themselves with whips, begging for the land to be cleansed of its defilement. Some claimed to have seen the duke's face in the window, covered in skin, but still alive. Others said that footsteps could be heard coming from under the ground at night. Rumors spread like darkness from the memoirs of a city chronicler. I witnessed the dissolution of a state. There was no war, no invasion, no rebellion, only a body, one body. Power rotted away with it. Not immediately, but with each passing week, decay spread to everything. Papers, the throne, crowns, rings, even the air, even faith. In May, an order was issued: seal the palace, wall up the entrances, pour wax into the crypt, destroy the records. Officially, the Duke died of a purulent fever of unknown origin. Unofficially, he was erased. The name Wilhelm von Zernbach was not mentioned in the chronicles. Coins bearing his image were melted down. Portraits were burned. All who served at his court were sent to the east or removed from office. Only fear remained. Politically, the duchy was divided between 3 neighbors. Each side received part of the territory, but none claimed the capital. The city was left without a ruler, without an army, without banners, only with a black sealed palace in the center, a tomb not only for the body, but for an entire era. In the chronicles compiled 50 years later, in the section Years of Great Turmoil, there is an entry. No one talks about him, but everyone remembers, not because he ruled, but because of how he died. Slowly, silently, with full memory, he rotted and looked at us. This death did not change everything at once, but it showed that the body of a ruler can become a sore on the state, that a mind incapable of dying with the flesh becomes a curse, that power not renounced in time is rot that spreads to all who dare to approach it. All that remained of the Duke was the silence that reigned in the palace for many years, a silence that suffocated the walls, a silence in which footsteps could be heard, the footsteps of one who rotted and remembered